Let's begin learning about a few basic hand tools, starting with screwdrivers.
Most everyone is familiar with the different types of screwdrivers. Over here we have the Phillips screwdrivers. They come in a variety of sizes, anywhere from the small, stubby ones all the way to longer shank ones, which can be very long. If you wanted to get a specialty screwdriver, they can be in excess of 2 feet long. Also, the tips come in different sizes as well. So you can have a very small number 1, you can have a common number 2 size, or even a larger number 3 size. Flathead screwdrivers are pretty much the same. One of the most common screwdrivers that we use is a pocket screwdriver, which you keep, of course, in your pocket. We like to use them for all kinds of things, especially to help us disconnect small connectors and maybe small pieces of trim, things of that nature. One of the types of drives that we are using more often now in automotive are the Torx Bits. They can come in a screwdriver type form with a handle, and they also can come in a interchangeable bit set like this one. So this one is pretty convenient. It has all kinds of different bits that you can attach to it, and it also has Torx bits over here as well. The only real disadvantage to using one of these kits is that a lot of times the handle is much wider than what can actually fit in a given space that you may be working in.
Another screwdriver that we like to use is called an impact screwdriver. Now, this is designed to withstand the impact of a hammer on the other end of it so that you can turn with greater force. Now, they do come with interchangeable bits, and you want to make sure that before you use it that the bits are in good shape and not sheared off, which they often are. So simply just find the right bit for the job, and then you can begin. Now, to use an impact screwdriver, you simply find the right bit. You can turn it left to loosen or right to tighten. Now, for us to loosen the screw, we have to turn left to loosen and hold it while we strike the back end of it as much as we have to get it to loosen.
A few hammers you'll be using are the ball peen hammer, dead blow hammer, sledgehammer, and a rubber mallet. So your most common one is going to be your ball peen hammer, and we sort of consider this our general purpose or all-purpose hammer in automotive. We do not use claw hammers in automotive because that's more of a carpenter type hammer, but this is considered more automotive since it's routinely used in collision repair as well. So nice all-purpose hammer. The dead blow hammer is used quite often as well, and there's actually a cartridge inside of the plastic casing that is filled with lead shot, very similar to a shotgun shell is. And the advantage of using a dead blow hammer over the ball peen hammer is that when you strike a surface, it doesn't bounce. Now we can do the same thing with a ball peen hammer, but you'll notice it will bounce. Now, bouncing is not always preferred because you may injure someone as well as hit something right behind you that you really don't want to hit. Okay. Sledgehammers are used for some of the more difficult to remove items that you might be trying to get off, such as hubs or something of that nature on especially heavier duty vehicles. Rubber mallets, we're really using these for things that you don't want to actually strike with a lot of force. You just want to tap something on there. So for example, we'll use this a lot for replacing hubcaps on a car after we've done a tire rotation or a brake service. So this way you're not pounding the hubcap back on with your hand, which can eventually give you carpal tunnel and nerve damage. So definitely much better to use a rubber mallet instead.
We also use these to check for loose suspension and exhaust components. Pry bars come in a wide variety of sizes. These are two of the most common sizes. For this particular job, we're going to be using the smaller one. In this demonstration, we are using a pry bar to remove an axle seal. However, pry bars are used for a variety of other jobs as well. Another common tool that you might find in the shop is a slide hammer. This is being used in conjunction with a bearing puller. And to use these in any adapter, you want to make sure that the adapter is screwed in very tightly to make sure that the slide hammer is not moving while you're using it. So the slide is weighted, and you simply pull it back and strike it against the rear surface to remove the bearing. Now, of course, we want to install a new bearing, and we're going to use a bearing installer in order to do that. So bearing installers usually have an adapter at the end with a variety of sizes, and you want to make sure you use the correct one that matches the size of the bearing as closely as possible. Now, this is more than just nuts and bolts. There's also procedure involved here as well. It's also always a good idea to lubricate the bearing. And if you're not really sure if this is the first time you're doing any particular job, you want to make sure to look at service information. Now we're going to install the seal. So we're going to, again, use the appropriate adapter that fits properly around the seal so that we do not damage it when it is being installed. So we simply screw the adapter on, get the new seal ready, insert it, and use our bearing/seal driver to install it with a ball-peen hammer.
You should also have a nice set of punches and chisels. Punches are used more for removing things, such as a roll pin, and chisels are used more for splitting, spreading, or even sometimes creating a groove so you can get a bite onto, let's say, a bolt or something that's very difficult to get off, and in conjunction with the hammer, remove that item. Now, you want to make sure that your chisels are in good shape, and your punches as well, of course. Once they get this mushroomed head on there, then you want to grind that off with a grinding wheel. And you also want to make sure that your chisels are nice and sharp. This one has become a little bit dull over time.
This is just one example of how a punch can be used to remove a roll pin from a machined surface, such as this valve body. Here we're going to show you a few tools and methods that are used to remove material off of a mating surface. So here you have a gasket scraper, which is usually preferred, but not on a machined surface. A putty knife has a tendency to do the same thing as the gasket scraper, only worse. If it catches a nick or burr, it will gouge the material, and that will not seal very well, especially on a block. A razor blade, anytime it would catch any small nick or burr, it is going to cut a groove into that machined surface. So a lot of us technicians like to use an angle die grinder. It does a really great quick job, but unfortunately on a block or cylinder head, that's a bad thing because it would remove the machined surface and it takes away a lot of material, which will eventually give you a surface that does not seal. So what we really want to use is gasket remover, a chemical gasket remover. You just spray it on the material that you want to be removed from a machined surface, let it sit for a little while, usually 5 to 10 minutes, and then you come back around with a plastic razor blade. Now, plastic, I know you might not think can do much, but really the chemical has done all the work for you already. So all you have to do is scrape off whatever material you're trying to get off of that machine surface. It will not damage it at all. And when you're done, you want to make sure you wipe it off with a rag, preferably spray it with some brake clean to make sure you get all of that gasket remover off. The reason being is this is very caustic. So when you're using this, you want to make sure that you are not accidentally spraying something that you do not want to get this on, such as a table with paint on it. It will absorb into the paint very quickly, as you can see, and it will remove it without any problem. So just be very careful when you are using this, also don't get it on your body.
Unlike with aluminum, with cast iron, you can actually use some air tools, like this angle die grinder. So basically you take an abrasive pad and you put it onto the die grinder by screwing it in, hook it up to shop air, and you simply do that by pulling the collar back, pushing it on the fitting, and releasing. And now if you wanted to actually work and rotate, you have to lift up the lock lever and then depress the lever. And then you just go ahead and remove all of the gasket material. Okay, and you would just simply continue using the die grinder until you have polished off all of the gasket material and removed any surface rust that may be there. Here's a variety of common wrenches that you're going to be using in the shop. This one, of course, being the most common, is a combination wrench. So we have an open end on one side, which kind of has a tendency to slip on very easily, but also slip off very easily. So sometimes if you're applying a lot of pressure or torque, this may not be the right side for you to use. The other end, the box end, is definitely preferred by most technicians to use, just because you are contacting more surface area of the fastener and it's more stable if you have to apply more torque or pressure to a fastener. Line wrenches are obviously sort of a specialty wrench used mostly for lines such as power steering lines, brake lines, and even fuel lines. We'll talk a little bit more about these as well as crow's feet coming up very shortly. This one is a ratchet wrench, which is one of the most used wrenches in the shop simply because it's really convenient. You have an open end on one side. Sometimes you have a box end on both ends, and each end will have a different size, such as one side will be 18 and the other side will be 15 or something of that nature. So the nice thing about this is that it ratchets. So you simply put the wrench on top of the fastener and you just turn it whichever way you want. Now sometimes if you want to turn the fastener in the opposite direction, depending on the ratchet wrench, you may have to take it off, flip it around, and use it that way. But a lot of ratchet wrenches also have a mechanism that you can just switch, and that way you can go in the opposite direction just by switching this. One wrench that you really want to avoid using is an adjustable wrench, also known as a crescent wrench. These jaws are very loose. Even if you tighten down on the fastener very tightly, the jaws can still become more loose, and again, you're really only holding on to two ends or two sides of the fastener. So there's really not a whole lot of surface area to push or pull against either. So this is not really preferred. You can round off the head of a lot of bolts and nuts by doing that, or by using this tool. But sometimes there's just not any other option. You may also see a pipe wrench in a lot of toolboxes, and this is really used for some of your more heavy-duty applications, if things are just having a really difficult time getting loosened, or a lot of times we'll use these for maybe an inner tie rod end or something of that nature. You may use this instead of, let's say, a pair of channel locks, or also known as multi-groove pliers.
Another wrench that you'll commonly see is a line wrench. Now the line wrench is different because it has more flats around it than an open end. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 flats on it to grip around a fastener, whereas the open end only has 2, and so you're not able to apply as much torque with those. Now crow's feet are very similar, and normally we use them for the same application of removing lines.
Diagonal cutters or side cutters, they have jaws that have sharpened ends on them and are primarily used for cutting any type of thin metal such as a cotter pin, or oftentimes we use these to cut wires as well. Since they do have nice sharp jaws, we sometimes also use them for gripping.
So a good example of what we might use diagonal cutters for are removing cotter pins from a tie rod end. Now as you can see, I can bend back one leg of the cotter pin. I can securely hold the loop end of the cotter pin to remove it. And then when we put the new cotter pin in, I can use it to bend back one side over top. And of course we don't want these ends to be too long, so we just simply, again, use our diagonal cutters to clip them off.
Some other pliers that we might use are needle nose pliers, and these are able to get into tight spaces if you need to grab something and pull something out. Most needle nose pliers also have a set of cutters down at the bottom, which are not very often used. Slip joint pliers, as their name implies, has a slip joint. So if you are trying to grab something that is smaller, you can use the small joint. If you need something that's a little bit larger, you can slip the joint open so that it opens farther to grip something that's maybe a little bit larger in size. Another really popular set of pliers is multi-groove pliers, also known as channel locks, although channel locks is a brand name just like Kleenex, for example, or Q-tips. We call these multi-groove pliers because it has multiple grooves that you can use to open up the two jaws very wide or very narrow to grip on just about anything that you want. These also come in a huge size to grip just about anything that you might possibly think of. One important thing to remember about these is that they do have a direction that you should turn in. So you always want to ensure that you are turning with the long jaw gripping the top of the fastener and the short jaw gripping the bottom, so that if you were to turn in a clockwise position, it automatically kind of locks in place. If you were to try to turn counterclockwise with this same setup, then it would continually slip and you would simply just round off or mar anything that you are trying to rotate. Vice grips are also another very popular option because these actually lock in place. Vice grip is actually simply another brand name, also known as locking pliers for the generic name. So you simply, whatever you want to lock onto, let's say it's a very smooth surface, difficult to grip, you can adjust the handle to open up the jaws as wide as you need, lock onto the fastener like so, and then rotate. If you are slipping, then you may need to release the pliers by pulling on this lever and rotate the jaws just a little bit tighter until you get it to the desired clamping force.